It started on a quiet October morning, the kind where the fog clung to the earth like a secret not yet ready to be told. Jackson Cole, a former Marine and lifelong outdoorsman, had just returned from a dawn hunt. His boots still damp with dew, the scent of pine and gunpowder fresh in the air. He felt more at home in the forest than he ever had among people. He lived on the edge of a suburban development in Pine Hollow, a place where the houses were pristine, the lawns surgically trimmed, and the rules suffocating. He didn't think much of the envelope at first, just a plain manila folder nailed, not taped, nailed, to his front door. No name, no return address, just the faint imprint of something circular on the back. He ripped it open. Inside was a grainy black and white photo. Jackson, stepping out of the woods behind his property, rifle slung over his shoulder. Next to it, a single line typed in bold font: "Cease or face consequences." His brow furrowed. He looked around, scanning the neighborhood from his porch. Quiet. Empty. Just the hum of sprinklers and the occasional rustle of wind through brittle leaves. No movement. No witnesses. He took the photo inside, studying it closer. The angle. It had to be taken from the green belt behind his house. But only HOA board members were allowed back there regularly. Still, Jackson didn't scare easy. He framed the photo on the wall above his workbench in the garage like a trophy. A challenge answered silently. 3 days passed. Then came the official notice, this time in a glossy envelope with the HOA's gold-embossed seal. They were claiming his hunting activities posed a danger to the community, citing vague safety codes and bylaws. They threatened escalating fines and potential legal action if he didn't comply. He laughed. He didn't hunt in the neighborhood. He hunted on his own 10-acre property, which he had bought specifically because it wasn't under HOA control. Their reach, legally, ended a good 100 feet from his back fence. But the letter ended with something far more troubling. Your actions may result in your removal from Pine Hollow if deemed a risk to harmony. Removal? Since when could an HOA remove someone from private property? That night, Jackson sat on his back porch, beer in hand, rifle resting against his leg. He watched the tree line where the forest met suburbia. Something didn't sit right. The tone, the timing, the photos. It wasn't just bureaucratic bullying. It felt like a message. And as the sun sank behind the evergreens and the sky turned a bruised shade of violet, he spotted it. A flicker of movement behind a tree. A silhouette. Watching him. They were testing him. Hunting the hunter. Jackson leaned back, took a sip, and muttered to himself, "Let's see who bleeds first." By the next morning, Jackson's gut told him something darker was at play. The HOA's letter wasn't just posturing. It was a warning disguised in legalese. He pulled his truck into the driveway after a supply run to town and spotted something new. A freshly printed sign posted right outside his fence line. "Attention! Unsafe activity detected. Area under review by HOA Compliance Committee." It was staked in public ground, just close enough to suggest guilt, just far enough to avoid trespassing. He leaned out of the truck and yanked it from the dirt with one hand. Underneath, stapled to the wooden post, was a smaller folded paper. It wasn't a legal document. It wasn't even official. It was a photo. Another one. This time, it showed his garage interior, where his hunting gear was kept. Jackson's jaw tightened. That meant someone had either used a drone, or worse, been inside. He stormed into the house, checking every window lock, every door. Everything was still secure. No signs of a break-in. But he couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there. Someone with keys, or at least codes. Someone who didn't need to break in because they had access. He thought about the contractor who installed his security system last year. A neighbor recommended by the HOA. Just a friendly local technician. At the time, it felt harmless. Now, not so much. He yanked the hard drive from his system, took it to his laptop, and started pulling footage. Most of it was normal. squirrels, wind, a delivery guy. Then, at 2:47 a.m., the night before, a gap. Exactly 13 minutes of black screen. Someone had cut the feed. The old Marine in him woke up. This wasn't just intimidation. This was recon. They were watching, probing, pushing. And they were too stupid to know they'd just crossed the wrong man's line. Later that day, Jackson drove to the HOA office, a sleek little brick building tucked between two manicured lots and a yoga studio. The receptionist, a too smooth man with plastic-perfect hair, greeted him with fake warmth. "Mr. Cole," he said with an oily smile, "we've been expecting." "Cut the crap," Jackson growled. "Tell your board I'm filing a harassment complaint. And if I catch one more of your cronies near my land, they'll find out how fast a man can disappear in those woods." The man's smile didn't fade. If anything, it deepened. Now. No need to get aggressive. We're just looking out for the best interests of Pine Hollow. Harmony, after all, is what keeps our little community clean. Jackson leaned in. "I'm not your community, and I sure as hell don't answer to you." As he walked out, he caught a glance at a hallway behind the desk. 4 people standing in a conference room, watching him through the glass. One of them was the man he saw in the woods. They didn't flinch when he made eye contact. They smiled. They'd wanted him to know they were watching. And Jackson, he smiled too. Because now he was watching back. By morning, Jackson had made a decision. No more warnings. No more waiting. If the HOA wanted a war, they'd get one. But it wouldn't be fought with angry emails or community votes. It would be fought with silence, strategy, and dirt. He started with a walk of the perimeter. His land sat on the farthest edge of Pine Hollow. 10 rugged acres of pine, cedar, and thick brush, separated by a crumbling wire fence that hadn't been touched since he moved in 5 years ago. Beyond that fence, development. Cookie-cutter homes, precisely paved sidewalks, and the HOA's watchful eyes. Jackson knelt beside a fence post. Something caught his attention. A series of fresh boot prints in the soil, just inside his line. Deep impressions, wide toe boxes, military-grade boots. They'd been here again, on his side. He took a long breath and scanned the tree line. Then, without a word, he went to work. Over the next 3 days, he built barriers, not just physical ones, but psychological. Trail cameras hidden in hollowed logs. Fishing line trip alerts. Motion sensors disguised in brush. He mapped out blind spots, back trails, and potential entry points. To them, it looked like wilderness. To Jackson, it was now a defensive grid. That same week, he made a quiet visit to the county records office. It wasn't the HOA that interested him this time. It was the land itself. He sat at an old wooden desk with the registrar, flipping through yellowed plats and dusty deed records. Something didn't add up. Pine Hollow hadn't always been a subdivision. 40 years ago, it was a privately owned hunting preserve, one enormous estate. All of it once belonged to a man named Martin Cole, his grandfather. And somehow, after Martin's sudden disappearance in the 80s, the land had been carved up and sold in sections, half of them to developers linked to a now-defunct company called Silver Pines Holdings. But one tract had never been sold. One long, narrow stretch that ran through the middle of Pine Hollow, hidden between lots and easements, unclaimed, untouched, still legally registered to the Cole Family Trust. Jackson's breath caught in his throat. The HOA had built roads, sidewalks, and even their clubhouse over land that still legally belonged to him. The lines were still in the dirt. They'd just been buried. He leaned back in the dusty chair, a slow grin forming on his face. "You sons of bitches," he muttered. The HOA wasn't harassing him just because he was hunting. They were pushing because he was standing on the last piece of leverage they didn't control. And they were terrified he might remember it. Now he had more than a rifle. He had a blueprint, a legal loophole, a buried secret. and a plan. This wasn't just a fight for his land anymore. It was a reckoning, one Pine Hollow wouldn't see coming. Jackson wasn't one for drama. He'd been through war zones more chaotic than any HOA meeting. But Pine Hollow had just made one critical mistake. They underestimated a man with time, purpose, and a long memory. Back at home, he laid the old parcel map across his garage workbench. Beneath it, his modern topographic survey. The overlap was perfect. Driveways, fountains, walking trails, all paved across land that technically wasn't theirs. The HOA had built their kingdom on a stolen foundation, and now he had proof. He didn't rush. He was patient. He visited the county clerk's office again, this time with a lawyer, a quiet one. The kind who didn't speak unless he was filing something devastating. Together, they began drawing up ownership claims and quiet title actions. One by one, every lot that encroached on Cole Trust land was documented, especially the one at the heart of it all, the HOA's proud little office, built right in the center of the original Cole tract. Jackson didn't want headlines. Not yet. He wanted silence. Meanwhile, the HOA escalated. 3 citations in 1 week. One for visible camouflage gear drying in public view, another for unsafe use of tools near wildlife habitats, and a final insult, potential firearm discharge audible during community quiet hours. Jackson posted each citation on his front gate like war trophies, but he didn't respond. Not in words. Instead, he bought land. Using 3 different shell LLCs, he acquired 4 properties. 2 foreclosed homes and 2 undeveloped lots, all bordering his own land, all inside the HOA boundaries. Nobody noticed. They were too busy obsessing over whether Mrs. Flanders' petunias matched HOA guidelines. That week, he also paid a visit to a real estate agent in town, not to sell, to buy more silence. Cash offers, quick closings. He had one goal: reach 30% ownership within Pine Hollow, enough to call a special vote on any community policy, even dissolution. He wasn't just defending anymore. He was positioning. Every night, he sat on the porch in the dark with a cup of coffee, reviewing maps, documents, and emails. Every now and then, he'd hear the distant crunch of leaves or the whine of a drone overhead, but he didn't flinch. Let them watch. They were about to witness the slow collapse of their perfect little empire. Then came the final stroke. He mailed a certified letter directly to the HOA board. The subject line was simple: Notice of intent to assert ownership. Parcel #C1983-11. Including structure at 13 Pine Hollow Drive. That was the clubhouse. Their headquarters. Their sanctuary. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, the HOA didn't send a response. No letter, no visit, no citation, just stillness. Jackson folded his arms, watching the wind sway the trees. The war had gone quiet. But everyone knows. That's when it's most dangerous. For 3 days, Jackson heard nothing from the HOA. Not a whisper, no letters, no fines. No smug lawn patrols slowly rolling past his driveway with clipboards and fake smiles. They were scared. He knew the silence was strategic, not surrender, but calculation. And that made them more dangerous than ever. Jackson didn't wait. He sent copies of the land claim to every resident whose property crossed into his inherited parcel. A simple cover letter. Your home may be sitting on land unlawfully annexed by the HOA. This is not a threat. It's a warning. From someone who believes in truth, not control. The message spread like wildfire. Within days, Pine Hollow's residents started whispering in grocery store aisles, at school drop-offs, and at mailbox clusters. The board called an emergency meeting, behind closed doors. No residents invited. But Jackson had planned for that. He'd hired a local tech whiz, a college kid named Gabe who used to mow his lawn. Gabe parked his rusted Honda across the street, popped the trunk, and activated a long-range microphone dish aimed straight at the clubhouse window. Jackson sat in his garage with headphones, sipping bourbon as the real conversations began. "We can't let this get out. He's bluffing. There's no way. We built on unclaimed land, Mark. He has proof. Then we buy him out. Offer him a settlement. Make this go away quietly. Do you have any idea who this guy is? He turned down a federal weapons contract because it didn't feel honest. You think he's going to take hush money?" Silence. Then the final voice, cold, clipped, the HOA president. "We'll ruin him. The media, the sheriff, code enforcement, whatever it takes. I don't care if we have to plant evidence." Jackson paused the recording and stared at the wall for a long moment. Plant evidence. Now they'd crossed another line. The next day, Jackson paid a visit to the sheriff's office. Not to complain, to offer proof. He handed over copies of his land deeds, a transcript of the board's conversation, carefully edited to keep Gabe out of it, and a personal message. "If anyone from the HOA tries to place anything illegal on my land, I will treat it as an act of trespassing and respond accordingly, within my rights." The sheriff, a stoic woman named Callahan, nodded slowly. She didn't like the HOA either. No one did. They just didn't have the guts to go against them. Until now. That same week, Jackson held his own meeting. Outdoors. No chairs. Just a fire pit, coffee, and truth. A dozen homeowners came. Then 2 dozen. Most just listened. But a few asked questions. Important ones. How do we get out from under them? What happens if you win? And then the best one of all. How do we help? Jackson stared into the flames. "We don't fight fire with fire," he said quietly. "We fight it with the truth and a deed." The storm didn't come with lightning. It came with paperwork. By the end of the week, Jackson's legal filings hit the county records office like a silent explosion. Title challenges, boundary disputes, injunctions. Every document was legitimate, every signature real, every claim rooted in history the HOA had ignored or buried. The HOA president, Linda Chase, received her copy while sipping wine on her porch. Her face blanched the moment she read the first line. "All structures currently residing within Parcel C 1983-11 are subject to immediate review and potential removal." The clubhouse, the sidewalks, even parts of her own backyard patio. It wasn't just Jackson's word anymore. It was now a matter of public record. Within 24 hours, local title insurance companies froze transactions within Pine Hollow. Nobody could sell. Nobody could buy. Realtors pulled listings. Property values wobbled like glass on a shaking table. At the next HOA board meeting, their first with mandatory public attendance due to pressure from residents, Jackson showed up. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply sat in the front row, arms crossed, his old military jacket zipped up, the county records folder resting on his lap like a quiet bomb. Linda Chase stood behind the podium, her voice tight. "There's no reason to panic. These claims are being handled through the proper legal channels, and the board has retained counsel." "That's a lie," a voice shouted from the crowd. All heads turned. It was Greg Hanley, a longtime resident and former board member who'd mysteriously stepped down a year ago. "I checked with the county myself," he continued. "Everything Jackson filed checks out. And you knew about this land issue before, didn't you, Linda?" She flinched. More voices joined. Not shouts. Questions. "What else are you hiding? You said our homes were safe. I want my HOA dues back." The room spun out of control. Papers slapped tables. One woman began recording on her phone. Linda tried to gavel the meeting back into order, but her authority, like everything else the board had built, was slipping through her fingers. Jackson quietly stood, tucked the folder under his arm, and left without a word. Outside, under the flickering parking lot lights, he felt the shift. This was no longer his fight alone. The neighborhood was starting to wake up, and inside his truck, a message waited on his burner phone. Just 6 words from his lawyer. County judge granted emergency hearing. It was happening faster than he expected. The wheels of justice, usually slow, were now greased with momentum and fear. He looked out across the rows of manicured homes, perfect lawns, trimmed hedges, all standing atop lies. He whispered to himself, one crack in the dam, and he knew the flood was coming. The courthouse was packed. Even the clerk looked surprised at the turnout as residents of Pine Hollow filed into the narrow chambers like ants from a disturbed nest. Some were angry. Some were anxious. A few were just curious. But all had heard the same whisper. Today was the day the HOA might fall. Jackson stood tall in the front row, wearing a plain black shirt and jeans. No suit, no tie, just calm certainty. Across from him, the HOA board sat rigid and pale. Linda Chase kept glancing toward the door like she was waiting for someone to swoop in and save her. But no one came. Judge Mallory, a sharp-eyed woman with a no-nonsense tone, looked over the stack of documents with growing disbelief. "You're telling me," she said, leveling a hard gaze at the HOA's attorney, "that the Pine Hollow Homeowners Association constructed a community office, multiple roads, and public amenities, without verifying legal ownership of the land?" The lawyer fumbled. "The original developer assured us." Judge Mallory cut him off. "Assurances don't override titles. Mr. Cole has presented clear and uncontested documentation tracing ownership through the Cole Family Trust, dating back 4 decades. She turned to Jackson. "And you are formally asserting possession of this land?" Jackson nodded. "I am. And I'm also requesting immediate injunctive relief, cessation of HOA operations on my property, removal of all HOA structures, and a public notice issued to all residents clarifying the land dispute." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Judge Mallory didn't hesitate. "Granted." Chaos exploded. Linda shot to her feet. "You can't do this. You don't understand what this means." Judge Mallory calmly raised her gavel. "You're right. I don't understand why this was allowed to continue for so long. The Pine Hollow HOA has 30 days to vacate all structures on Mr. Cole's property. Effective immediately, all HOA authority within the disputed zone is suspended." As her gavel slammed down, Jackson felt the shift in the room. Not just shock, but release. Decades of quiet resentment boiled to the surface. Later that afternoon, Jackson returned home to a line of cars waiting outside his gate. Neighbors, dozens of them. Some wanted to apologize. Some just wanted to shake his hand. But most were there for one reason: to resign from the HOA. By sundown, 46 homeowners had signed a petition to dissolve the board entirely. But Jackson wasn't done. He hired contractors the next morning. Bulldozers rolled in by noon. With a quiet nod, he pointed toward the HOA clubhouse. "Start there." The sound of walls being torn down echoed across Pine Hollow like thunder. Linda Chase and the remaining board members were seen driving away hours later, boxes piled high, faces stiff with fury. Not a word spoken, not a fight left. They were exiled from the very kingdom they tried to rule. Jackson stood at the edge of the cleared land as dust filled the air. He didn't smile. He just whispered, "Justice isn't loud. It's permanent." Pine Hollow changed. In just 6 months, the neighborhood that once prided itself on uniform hedges, identical mailboxes, and over-policed grass heights had become something else. Something real. With the HOA dissolve, there was no board to send threats, no fines for fence colors, and no watchful eye peering through every bush. Freedom returned like spring after a long winter, awkward at first, then blooming fast. But Jackson, he remained exactly where he'd always been. Out on his porch, coffee in hand, rifle resting nearby, eyes watching the woods. The clubhouse was gone now. Nothing but flattened earth and a few metal scraps. In its place, Jackson had planted a small stone marker, a clean, square-cut slab etched with 5 words. You do not own everything. No names, no dates, just truth. The county tried to name the reclaimed parcel after him, Coal Reserve or Jackson Hollow. He declined. This land has its name already, he told them. It remembers. And it did. The wildlife returned. The owls, the deer, the peace. He still hunted, but only what he needed. His neighbors no longer feared the sound of distant gunshots. They welcomed it. It meant someone was standing guard. It meant the land hadn't gone soft. As for Linda Chase, she vanished from the state records shortly after the court decision. Rumor had it she sold her assets, left town, and changed her name. A woman who once ruled over property lines and paint swatches now couldn't even plant a flower without asking someone else's permission. Poetic. One evening, Gray Hanley stopped by with a bottle of aged bourbon. They sat by the fire pit, stars overhead, crickets chirping. You ever think about running the neighborhood? Greg asked. Make it official. A new board, a fair one. You'd win in a landslide. Jackson chuckled. If I wanted to rule people, I'd have stayed in Washington. They clinked glasses. No more power struggles. No more fake titles. Just people. Just land. Weeks later, Jackson received a handwritten letter in a plain white envelope. No return address. Inside was a single sentence. We thought we owned the land, but it was the land that owned us. A former ruler. He folded it gently and tucked it into a tin box with the original deed. A box that now sat beneath the floorboards, protected by memory and meaning. The war was over, but the story, it stayed alive. Fathers told their sons, grandmothers told the neighbors, a story of a quiet man who never raised his voice, never threw a punch, and still tore down an empire. Not with rage, but with proof, with patience, with the earth itself. Because when a man knows who he is, and the land remembers who he comes from, even the mightiest walls crumble.